This is a Fox News alert. I'm Bret Baier at the White House. Breaking news tonight about health care from both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. There could soon be a deal to extend Obamacare health insurance exchanges for another 2 years. This comes following last week's move by President Trump to end federal subsidies for insurance premiums. The president's declaration again today that as far as he's concerned, Obamacare is dead, and he's pushing for another effort to get block grants to the states to handle this issue after tax reform. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin joins me here in moments, but first we have Fox team coverage. John Roberts here at the White House with what else the president said during his second Rose Garden news conference in as many days. But we start off with correspondent Peter Ducey and a possible deal on Capitol Hill. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Brett. The rare bipartisan agreement reached today was the last thing Republicans wanted on Election Day. They were going to repeal Obamacare without any Democratic votes and then replace it with a GOP alternative. But now they're stuck making a deal with Democrats to fix Obamacare.
Obamacare is virtually dead.
But not completely dead, because Democrats and Republicans today agreed to revive something President Trump just killed. Federal funds for insurance companies that offer certain Obamacare plans, known as cost-sharing reduction payments.
We're talking about a 2-year extension on the cost-sharing payments, and then what happens? And more meaningful flexibility to states.
Keeping those payments in place helps stop premiums from rising, a main bargaining point for the main Democratic negotiator, Senator Patty Murray.
Chairman Alexander and I were able to find common ground on a number of steps to stabilize the markets and to help protect families from premium spikes as a result of the sabotage we have seen from this administration.
President Trump, who campaigned to repeal and replace Obamacare, insists today's deal isn't permanent.
The solution will be for about a year or 2 years, and it'll get us over this intermediate hump.
If Obamacare is eventually repealed, the president said today he favors a replacement that looks like a plan drawn up by GOP Senators Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Graham.
It needs to be replaced. The question is, does Bernie Sanders replace it with single-payer health care, or do we do the block grant?
Some Democrats are now patting the president on the back for being so hands-on.
I applaud, and if the president kind of pushed him forward to put us back together, that's the way it should be done.
But others on the left are more skeptical.
It is not a done deal that this agreement reached in principle by Senators Alexander and Murray will ever become law.
And it's not just Democrats. There's no guarantee Republicans have enough votes in the Senate, which the majority party learned the hard way when Senator John McCain sided with Democrats in July, sinking the Republicans' replacement effort. But today, McCain said he's not definitely a nay vote next time, despite problems he's had recently with the president.
My job as a United States Senator is a senator from Arizona, which I was just reelected to. You mean that I'm somehow going to behave in a way that I'm going to block everything because of some personal disagreement? That's a dumb question.
Even if this deal squeaks through the Senate, it may face even more resistance in the House. That's where lawmakers already had enough votes to replace Obamacare back in May, and that means finding the votes for anything that could prolong Obamacare. It's going to be tough. Brett?
Peter Ducey live on the Hill. Peter, thank you. President Trump talked with reporters for the second day in a row in the Rose Garden, this time as part of a joint news conference with the Prime Minister of Greece. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts got the first question this afternoon. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. Today's press conference was neither as freewheeling nor as long as yesterday's impromptu Rose Garden event, but it still yielded some moments. The Greek Prime Minister got the red carpet treatment today, a prestigious Rose Garden appearance alongside President Trump. A warm welcome for a leader who not long ago referred to candidate Donald Trump as evil.
Mr. Prime Minister, with respect to the president, in March of 2016, you said of the potential for a Donald Trump presidency, quote, "I hope we will not face this evil." And I'm wondering if after spending time with the president, you have changed your mind or if you're of the same mind.
I wish I knew that before my speech.
Through an interpreter, Alexis Tsipras said he appreciated the president's embrace of Greece.
I think our collaboration will be very substantial, and I'm very optimistic after the meeting that we had today.
But President Trump did acknowledge some world leaders were rightly concerned about what a Trump presidency would bring.
A number of countries were a little bit nervous at the beginning, and I have very good relationships with the leaders of virtually every country I've dealt with. But the reason they were concerned was because I will not allow our country, the United States of America, to be taken advantage of by so many other countries all over the world.
As relations with Turkey, a NATO ally, become more tense, Greece sees an opening for even closer ties with the U.S. as a pillar of peace and stability. President Trump hailed Greece's economic recovery and promoted the potential $2.4 billion upgrade of Greece's F-16 fighter fleet.
These initiatives make both our people safer and create good jobs for our hardworking citizens.
But while the president and prime minister were putting aside past differences, the split between President Trump and Arizona Senator John McCain only appeared to grow wider after McCain sharply criticized the president's foreign policy last night.
Some half-baked, spurious nationalism cooked up by people who would rather find scapegoats than solve problems.
In a round-robin of radio interviews this morning, President Trump promised McCain could be in for a scorching.
People have to be careful because at some point I fight back. Yeah. You know, I'm being very nice. I'm being very, very nice. But at some point I fight back, and it won't be pretty.
President Trump also continued his spat with the Obama administration over condolence calls to the families of fallen heroes. After first asserting yesterday, then partially walking back his declaration that President Obama didn't make calls to families, the president made it very personal today.
I mean, you could ask General Kelly, did he get a call from Obama? You could ask other people. I don't know what Obama's policy was. I write letters, and I also call.
A senior White House official confirms to Fox News that President Obama did not make a condolence call to Kelly or his wife after their son was killed in Afghanistan in 2010. But the Kellys did attend a White House breakfast for Gold Star families a year later, where they sat at Michelle Obama's table. Tonight, President Trump is turning his attention toward tax reform, making his case to the Heritage Foundation. Despite signals yesterday from Senate Leader Mitch McConnell that he may have to wait until next year for tax reform, President Trump is optimistic.
I think we're going to be good for taxes, and it's, very close because we have no support from the Democrats. They're obstructionists.
President Trump tonight is also looking for a new nominee to be the drug czar. Congressman Tom Marino took his name out of contention for the second time after a 60 Minutes report that a bill he sponsored in Congress has contributed to the nation's opioid epidemic. Brett?
John Roberts, just down the driveway here. John, thanks. Let's go deeper into the issue of the budget and tax reform. Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin joins me here on the North Lawn. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
So the budget this week, you have a vote coming up. Are you confident that you have the votes to get the budget first before you get tax reform?
Well, I think we're very comfortable with where we are with the budget, and we're looking forward to the Senate passing it tomorrow.
You think Senator Paul can get there?
We'll see. I know the president's had multiple conversations, and I hope he votes in favor, because this is critical. This isn't just about tax reform. This is about jobs and creating economic growth, and that's what we're focused on.
A lot of people are focused on also the timeline. Originally back when you thought August was that, and then health care took a long time. Last time we talked, you thought into the fall and possibly before the winter. House Speaker Ryan is saying Christmas deadline. Is that realistic?
Well, Brett, as you know, it took Ronald Reagan over 2 years on a bipartisan basis to get tax reform done. So if we get tax reform done this year, it will be extraordinary, and that's our objective. Our objective is to get it on the president's desk by December, to get him to sign it this year.
And it seemed like the president and Senator McConnell were laying the groundwork for the possibility it goes into 2018.
Well, we're going to work on this as fast as we can, but there's no artificial deadline. It's about getting it passed, and I've said all along, this is a pass-fail exercise, and we've got to get it done to create economic growth and create a competitive business system.
Let's go to specifics. The White House Council of Economic Advisors issued a forecast of an average income bump of as much as $9,000 for American families based on the projected corporate tax cut. How do you get there? Doesn't that depend on what these companies do with that extra money, that increased revenue? I mean, what's to prevent them from taking the profits and bonuses and not reinvesting?
Well, Kevin Hassett and others have done great research on this. And, Bret, I think, as you know, we have one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. We tax on worldwide income. We have this concept of deferral. If you leave the money offshore, you don't pay taxes. So trillions of dollars are sitting offshore. And this is all about making American business competitive. And, you know, I've repeated this, that over 70% of this is passed on to the worker, that the corporate tax is borne by the worker. Kevin Hassett, the CEA, has done the research, and there's going to be a lot of other economists who come out along with that.
You've said the corporate tax at 20% is kind of that's not going to change.
It is. That's our bottom line, because we need to do that to make it competitive.
So where's the wiggle room? Is it on the state and local taxes?
Well, I think, as we've said all along, our objective has been to get rid of a lot of deductions and bringing down the rates. And on the state and local taxes, we fundamentally think that the federal government should get out of business of subsidizing the states. But that's something we're working very closely with the House and Senate on.
It sounds like it might be a negotiating point.
I would say everything's negotiable to get this done.
Minus corporate tax.
Minus the corporate tax. But let me just say, going back to SALT, it's not that SALT is negotiable. What we're focused on right now is making tweaks to the system to make sure that we have a middle-income tax cut and that people in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and others aren't hurt too much by the elimination of state and local deductions.
You've talked a lot about growth and really getting this economic engine going. There are concerns up on Capitol Hill from deficit hawks. Are you concerned that you can get them over the finish line if, you have Senator Corker saying he's not going to vote for any tax reform that raises the deficit at all?
Well, Senator Corker has been very helpful. He was critical to getting the budget out of committee. I've gone through the numbers with him. Again, this is relatively simple math. We hope to have a budget that's $1.5 trillion in reconciliation. As we've said before, there's $500 billion, $500 billion of difference, $500 billion, $500 billion between baseline and policy. That takes us down to $1 trillion, and there's $2 to $2.5 trillion of growth. So we're pretty comfortable this will be a $1 trillion positive, paying down the deficit by the time we get done with this.
How do you think you need to get Democrats on board, looking at the landscape you have now? And how do you do that?
I think we'd like to. I mean, I was at dinner last night, on a bipartisan dinner with Democrats and Republican senators. We were talking about the tax plan. The issues that we're talking about are middle-income tax cuts, making business competitive. I hope that's something that Democrats understand just as much as Republicans.
What about repatriation? Is it going to be completely separate from infrastructure? Are you still talking about tying repatriation of those dollars coming back to some infrastructure?
Well, at the end of the day, cash is fungible, and we're looking at everything as revenues and expenses. But I think these are two very complicated issues. The president absolutely wants to get infrastructure done. That's a huge, critical priority of his. But I think it's just too complicated to put it together with taxes.
You're talking about timing. We haven't seen a lot of details yet. Obviously, you're dealing in details with Capitol Hill. When do you think that all of it is going to kind of roll out?
Bret, our expectation is if the budget gets passed tomorrow night, which we expect it to, it would go into conference with the House. As soon as the budget comes out of conference, our expectation is both the House and the Senate will be releasing virtually all the details of the bill, and we'll be working on it closely with them.
What about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau? Do you think that has a future?
I think it has a future, but it has a future in a significantly smaller way. Consumer protection is important, but we've got to get rid of a lot of the rules that are just hindering the economy and growth at the time.
In the wake of Equifax, it seemed like perhaps there's going to be a call for it more.
Well, that's actually something we had a FIBIC, which is the group that we meet across the regulators and across the agencies today on cybersecurity. Obviously, cybersecurity is a huge issue. I just finished the G7 and G20 meetings here. That was a major issue. And we're obviously very concerned about the Equifax breach and making sure that this doesn't occur again.
The head, Richard Cordray, is considering we're told to run for Ohio governor. So could the president then appoint someone new?
Absolutely. Cordray's term is up next year. We'll see whether he serves it out or not, but we'll be replacing him either way.
Last thing. Deficit and debt, concern about the national debt. If the engine of the economy really starts churning, it sets into a motion perhaps an inflationary environment. If interest rate goes up 1%, the U.S. starts paying more on interest on the national debt than we do for defense. The concern for the national debt going up in this environment, how serious is it?
Well, Bret, as you know, we are concerned about the debt. We've gone from $10 trillion to $20 trillion under the last administration, and we want to put in place economic programs that will pay down the debt over time. That's something that's very important.
Mr. Secretary, we appreciate the time.
Great to see you.
As always.
Thank you.
A judge in Hawaii, meantime, has blocked the latest version of the president's immigration travel ban just hours before it was set to take effect. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders says the decision undercuts the president's efforts to keep the American people safe. Justice Department spokesman says it will appeal. There are growing concerns tonight about water contamination and disease in Puerto Rico, nearly a month after Hurricane Maria hit there. Officials say running water has been restored to 72% of the island population, but raw sewage is said to be pouring into rivers and reservoirs. 20 of the island's 51 sewage treatment plants are out of service. The EPA says it will dedicate more staff this week to inspect roughly 250 small water utilities that serve remote, isolated communities. Right now, we're releasing our new Fox polls on a couple of the big off-year political races. In the Alabama Senate contest, Republican Roy Moore and Democrat Doug Jones are tied at 42 apiece. An early poll in traditionally red, of course, Alabama. That is raising some eyebrows. And in the New Jersey governor's race, Democrat Phil Murphy has a 14-point lead on Republican Lieutenant Governor Kim Quadagno. The Dow crossed the 23,000 mark for the first time today. Industrial average gained 40.5 for a record close again, and the S&P 500 was up 2. The Nasdaq lost a third. Up next, the company behind the infamous dossier on President Trump says its executives will refuse to talk to Congress. Gorgeous night at the White House. Welcome back. The political research firm behind the controversial, unverified dossier on President Trump that helped kickstart the FBI Russia probe is fighting subpoenas from the House Intelligence Committee. In a letter obtained by Fox News, Fusion GPS insists it has First Amendment rights like a news organization to protect its clients and sources. Tonight, we take an in-depth look at the company behind the dossier in an exclusive report. Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge.
Based in Washington, D.C., Fusion GPS describes itself as a strategic intelligence firm. It commissioned the controversial Trump dossier and has a track record of using intimidation and smear tactics, according to congressional testimony, statements for the record, and the first-hand account of London-based Venezuelan journalist Alec Boyd.
They are particularly good at spreading misinformation, disinformation, and smears.
In his first American television interview, Boyd says he was targeted after his 2012 reporting on Derwick Associates, a power company with close ties to the Venezuelan government. The company allegedly skimmed nearly $1 billion from rigged contracts with the late Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez.
My understanding is that they were hired basically to smear Derwick opponents.
British police records show Boyd reported a break-in with 2 laptops stolen from his London home in November 2014.
What was on the computers?
Evidence about corruption and scandals. There's a lot of information about my sources, people that were believed to be collaborating and sending me information from Venezuela were assaulted in Venezuela by the intelligence police of Mr. Chavez.
Did Fusion GPS come after you?
They created fake Twitter accounts with my name. They produced huge amounts of information, fake information about me, accusing me from being a pedophile to being an extortionist, to a drug trafficker, to a car thief.
Boyd says he believes the suspects seen in the security camera video left pictures of his children inside his coat as a warning.
The message was, we know where you are. We know where your children are. About a week after that, 2 sets of envelopes were sent to me from Tbilisi in Georgia, handwritten messages saying, "You touched the wrong girl, you pedophile. You think no one can touch yours?"
Fusion GPS is led by Glenn Simpson and Peter Fritsch, who left the Wall Street Journal about a decade ago. Boyd says this document shows Fritsch traveled to Venezuela to shut down any investigative reporting into Derwick's actions.
Does Fusion GPS use its credentials as former journalists?
I believe they're basically cashing in the years of experience that they accumulated collectively in different newspapers, in different media around the world.
Do you swear?
Boyd's allegations mirror congressional testimony from Bill Browder, who told senators Fusion GPS used smear tactics to discredit him and his late attorney Sergei Magnitsky, who he says was tortured and murdered 8 years ago in a Russian jail. Moreover, in a congressional declaration, human rights activist Thor Halvorson said Fusion GPS used, quote, scorched earth methods. To date, Simpson has refused to reveal his sources and who paid for the Trump dossier.
I don't believe certain privileges that apply to journalists or to lawyers should apply to Mr. Simpson, because he's neither. He's basically a spin doctor.
Fusion GPS did not respond to multiple requests for comment. A lawyer for Derwick Associates did not address its relationship with Fusion GPS or the Boyd allegations, but said the claims by a human rights activist to Congress are without merit. Brett.
Continue to follow it. Catherine, thank you. Up next, Congressman Trey Gowdy on how then FBI Director James Comey made up his mind long before the conclusion of the Hillary Clinton email investigation. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 11 in Los Angeles, where crews are working in steep terrain to battle an out-of-control fire near an historic observatory on Mount Wilson. A huge plume of smoke was visible across Los Angeles Basin and surrounding valleys after the blaze broke out shortly before 4 a.m. About 25 acres of dry brush were charred as flames churned down the rugged mountainside. Fox 51 in Gainesville, as Florida Governor Rick Scott declares a state of emergency in advance of Thursday's speech by white nationalist Richard Spencer at the University of Florida. Governor Scott warning in an executive order Monday that a threat of potential emergency is imminent. The order allows local law enforcement authorities to partner with state and other agencies to provide security for that event. And this is a live look at New York from our affiliate Fox 5, looking at Times Square there. One of the big stories there tonight, talks between the NFL owners and the Players Association over player protests. The league has been criticized over allowing players to kneel during the national anthem to bring attention to what they consider racial injustice. A players' union spokesman calls today's session productive. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway. From Special Report, we'll be right back to the White House. Welcome back to the White House. The FBI is releasing documents confirming that then FBI Director James Comey began drafting his public statement about the Hillary Clinton email investigation 2 months before it was complete. Joining me now with reaction is South Carolina Congressman Trey Gowdy. He's the chairman of the House Oversight Committee and a member of the House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees. He's in Greenville tonight. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
I think I left out ethics. You're on every committee, I guess.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for being here. Listen to this soundbite from a hearing.
Did you make the decision not to recommend criminal charges relating to classified information before or after Hillary Clinton was interviewed by the FBI on July the 2nd?
After. If colleagues of ours believe I am lying about when I made this decision, please urge them to contact me privately so we can have a conversation about this. All I can do is tell you again, the decision was made after that because I didn't know what was going to happen in that interview.
Well, now the FBI has come out with these documents that suggest that that decision was made well before that time. Your thoughts on all of this?
Well, Brett, we're going to take him up on his offer. We are going to talk to his present and former colleagues. May the 2nd is when these memos, these heavily redacted memos, appear where they are discussing internally whether or not to make a charging decision. It is a month and a half later before he announces his decision in early July. So you got, that's 2 months. 2 months from May the 2nd until July the 5th. There were 24 witness interviews in that time period. So if you're discussing whether or not to charge someone in early May and you haven't interviewed 24 witnesses, including one named Clinton, John Ratcliffe asked exactly the right question. I'm just not sure that Director Comey gave him an accurate answer.
I interviewed then Attorney General Loretta Lynch. I asked her this about this investigation. Does it concern you, though, that there is this perception that your Justice Department may, in the end, cut Secretary Clinton a break or do her a favor?
With every case, we handle it in the same way, and that's what I'd like to convey to the American people.
Now, Comey said that the tarmac meeting between Loretta Lynch and former President Bill Clinton was what precipitated his action of taking it essentially from DOJ. But that doesn't seem to add up.
No, the chronology does not add up. Again, May the 2nd is when they are discussing their charging decision. The meeting on the tarmac was June 26th, June 27th. So that's a month and a half later. And then a couple of days later, they interview Secretary Clinton. And then 2 days later, they decide that they're not going to charge. And he makes that public pronouncement. So his ostensible reason for taking that decision away from the Department of Justice was that meeting on the tarmac. But yet a month and a half earlier, he is memorializing a decision he's already made. So the chronology does not add up. His answers have been all over the map to both the Intelligence Committee and the clip you just played from Oversight. So we need to talk to him again, but we need to look at these memos before we have that conversation with him.
So you would like to see Comey back testifying on Capitol Hill?
For a number of reasons. He made a lot of decisions in 2016 that I think are worth reviewing. You know, Brett, whenever somebody decides to charge someone, there are lots of layers of scrutiny. When you decide not to charge someone, there aren't that many layers of scrutiny, but there ought to be at least a couple. The media should do it, but also Congress should look at this decision not to charge and whether or not it was made before you interviewed 24 witnesses, including the target of the investigation. Yeah, we need to talk to him again.
Loretta Lynch is up on the Hill Friday, we're told. Will she be asked any of this?
I don't think so. She's appearing before the House Intelligence Committee, and it will be limited to the scope of the Russia investigation, although you raise a good point. There are lots of reasons to talk to Loretta Lynch also, including to either corroborate or contradict Jim Comey's recollection that he talked to her about his decision to appropriate the Clinton server decision onto himself, but not on Friday. That will be restricted to what did Russia do and with whom did they do it.
There's a lot of investigations. Obviously, the Russia investigation, the Bob Mueller special counsel investigation. You are also looking and have talked to the former ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Power. We reported that she requested, or her office requested, some 260-plus efforts to unmask. In other words, get who was talking and picked up in surveillance. How did she answer that question? Why so many?
Well, I'll tell you broadly, Brett, I think if she were on your show, she would say those requests to unmask may have been attributed to her, but they greatly exceed by an exponential factor the request she actually made. So that's her testimony, and she was pretty emphatic in it. The surveillance community, the intelligence community has assigned this number of requests to her. Her perspective, her testimony is they may be under my name, but I did not make those requests. So we've got to get to the bottom of that. If there is someone else making requests on behalf of a principal in the intelligence community, we need to know that because we're getting ready to reauthorize a program that's really important to the country, but also has a masking component to it.
Two more quick questions, and that is, any word back from the White House on your request for information about the use of private emails here?
Yes, sir. On the issue of private email and private travel, we have 3 categories: fully complied, partially complied, and ain't really done a good job yet. The third category, we have written those agencies back and said, okay, you didn't respond the first time. This is number 2, and if you don't do it number 2, the word's going to start with an S and rhyme with subpoena.
Lastly, there are Democrats, and social media is picking it up, that this White House, this president, hasn't really talked about what happened in Niger with these 4 special forces soldiers who were killed. People bringing up your name for the investigation into Benghazi. Your thoughts on that and why we don't know anything?
Well, with respect to Benghazi, we looked at what happened in Libya, 2 years after it happened, and after 4 or 5 other congressional committees had tried to look into it, but without much success. So we're not 2 years down the road in terms of what happened in Niger. I want to know what happened anytime any American citizen, particularly a soldier, loses his or her life on the battlefield. That would be Armed Services Committee. It might be the House Intelligence Committee. We're nowhere near needing a select committee, which is what I was on. But it also hasn't been 2 years, and we didn't have a false video narrative. And no one was emailing their daughter with a different explanation than the one that they were giving the public. So I get that my Democrat friends are obsessed with Benghazi. The report's been out for a while. I would encourage them to read it. It's a little early to start drawing that analogy.
Just bring it up because it came up on a couple of interviews I just listened to before I came on. Mr. Chairman, we appreciate your time. We'll follow up on all of these issues coming up. Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Up next, our Whatever Happened To series has some breaking news on the murder of a Border Patrol agent. First, beyond our borders tonight, Kurdish forces have pulled out of disputed areas across northern and eastern Iraq. This comes a day after handing over the northern city of Kirkuk to federal forces amid a tense standoff following last month's vote for independence. The Taliban unleashed a wave of attacks across Afghanistan today, suicide bombers targeting police compounds and government facilities. At least 74 people were killed. One Afghan official calls it the biggest terrorist attack of this year. Anguished families gathered across Somalia's capital today at funerals for the more than 300 people killed in Saturday's massive truck bombing. Survivors are also waiting for word on nearly 70 people still missing there. The Somali government is blaming the al-Shabaab terror group, which is not commenting. A U.S. military plane arrived in Mogadishu today with medical and humanitarian supplies. Just some of the other stories beyond our borders tonight. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the White House. Tonight, our Whatever Happened To story deals with the gun-running investigation known as Fast and Furious. Viewer Mary Haig tweeted us about it. This evening, there is breaking news about the murder of a U.S. Customs agent that was a major part of this story. Here's national correspondent William Lajeunesse.
We feared that these fugitives would never be brought to justice.
Almost 7 years after his murder, Mexican police on Saturday arrested the last man wanted in the death of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry.
In the eyes of the law, each one of these members of the RIP crew were equally responsible for Brian's death.
Mexican military and U.S. law enforcement apprehended Jesus Rosario Favela Astaraga in the city of Chihuahua, south of El Paso. In December 2010, Terry and 3 agents confronted the drug smugglers in the Arizona desert. When agents yelled police, the Mexicans opened fire, killing Brian. The U.S. attorney charged 2 co-conspirators and 5 gunmen. 5 are in prison, 2 await extradition.
People died at the hands of these guns.
2 weapons found at the scene belonged to Operation Fast and Furious, a botched federal investigation. Congress held then Attorney General Eric Holder in contempt for failing to turn over documents implicating his department. President Obama claimed executive privilege. But to the dismay of former Congressman Jason Chaffetz, the new administration refuses to waive that privilege, leaving the family with the same unanswered questions.
It's up to Attorney General Sessions to pull the trigger, release the documents, give Congress what it deserves to see, and to give the Brian Terry family the peace that it needs to understand what fully happened.
While the U.S. and Mexico may share political differences, sources say law enforcement on both sides of the border remain committed in this case finding justice for one of their own. Brett?
William, thank you. A senior Syrian commander says U.S.-backed forces have liberated the city of Raqqa from ISIS terrorists. It would be a major defeat for an extremist group said to be collapsing. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin is following the situation from the Pentagon tonight. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Brett. The Pentagon isn't yet ready to pronounce the ISIS capital completely liberated. At a press briefing earlier today, a U.S. military spokesman told reporters 90% of Raqqa has been captured and roughly 100 ISIS fighters remain in the city. But that's not the biggest threat.
The fight in Raqqa is more about a fight against IEDs and explosives than it is against ISIS.
Highlighting the danger, Colonel Ryan Dillon said a U.S.-backed Syrian commander was killed by a roadside bomb while walking in Raqqa yesterday. 350 ISIS fighters have surrendered in the past week, but the pending fall of the ISIS capital doesn't mean the end of ISIS yet. Colonel Dillon said the fight will move to eastern Syria, where ISIS leaders have fled in recent months. Next door in Iraq, ISIS controls just 3% of the country, including a pocket along the Syrian border. Overall, about 6,500 ISIS fighters remain in Syria and Iraq. Today marks exactly 3 years since the U.S.-led coalition formed to fight ISIS. When ISIS fighters took Raqqa, there were iconic images of them parading in the streets and this armored vehicle doing donuts in the traffic circle. Today, U.S.-backed fighters recreated that scene by doing their own donuts to celebrate. Officials warn that ISIS will likely go underground to countries like Yemen, where the Pentagon says for the first time U.S. aircraft bombed 2 ISIS training camps yesterday. The Pentagon is concerned about what happens the day after Raqqa is liberated. There's no question when a terrorist group loses its capital, it's a big win. Hundreds of U.S. troops remain in Syria. Senior U.S. and Russian officers met face-to-face last week for the second time in a month as both countries seek to stay out of each other's way as the fighting moves to eastern Syria. Brett.
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. 2 Chinese nationals have been indicted on charges of manufacturing tons of fentanyl and other powerful narcotics that were peddled in the U.S. A Justice Department official says the pair ran one of the world's most prolific drug trafficking and money laundering organizations. Officials say American consumers could purchase fentanyl and other dangerous drugs online directly from Chinese factories. Next up, President Trump says Obamacare is virtually dead, but acknowledges there is a short-term plan to keep it alive that he supports for the time being. We'll get reaction from the panel as you look at the West Wing doors here at the White House. Stay with us.
Obamacare is a disgrace to our nation. Obamacare is a disaster. It's virtually dead.
It's a hot news item just announced today.
We're talking about a 2-year extension on the cost-sharing payments, and then what happens? And more meaningful flexibility to states.
This uncertainty and dysfunction cannot continue.
The president had been sabotaging this bill, and the agreement would undo much of that sabotage.
The solution will be for about a year or 2 years, and it'll get us over this intermediate hump because we have, as you probably know, we either have the votes or we're very close to having the votes, and we will get the votes.
The outline of a bipartisan compromise in the works on Obamacare. This is from Senators Lamar Alexander and Patty Murray, who've been working on this, and it extends the subsidies that were cut off by the president just on Friday for, as you heard, a couple of years. The president signing on to it. However, tweeting tonight, any increases in Obamacare premiums is the fault of the Democrats for giving us a product that never had any chance of working. Just to be clear where he stands about Obamacare overall. Let's welcome in our panel. We'll start there. Joining me here at the White House, Shannon Pettypiece, White House correspondent for Bloomberg News. And in our Washington bureau, Charles Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times, and Tom Rogan, commentary writer for the Washington Examiner. Shannon, it seems like there's movement here, at least on the short-term deal.
Yes, on a short-term deal, because the fact of the matter is there's still millions and millions of people who get their insurance through this Obamacare exchange. They will start enrolling very soon for their insurance plans for next year. So there needs to be something for these people in the interim so they have plans that they can afford. So a short-term deal. But when we're talking short-term, Lamar Alexander is talking a couple years to give Republicans an opportunity to come up with an alternate plan. We're not talking like a couple months. So this could end up being a longer-term patch.
Right. And Charlie, that is the question, because the president seems like once he gets tax reform, he wants to go on to the block grants effort, which was the Cassidy-Graham bill that fell 1 vote short in the Senate last time around.
Yeah, and you know, whatever you think of this deal that is being outlined today, and I would think that Democrats ought to like it. There's a lot in it there for them to like. It wouldn't have happened if it had not been for Donald Trump, as you pointed out, saying, you know, batting down the subsidies last Friday. But I have to say, it's a very strange thing to have a Republican in the White House and Republicans controlling both chambers of Congress, and we've gone from repeal and replace to essentially legalizing something that the courts had said was illegal, which is these subsidies. That Obama, and when Congress refused to give Obama the subsidies, he just picked up his phone and his pen and he started, including them. And it was an extra legal, unconstitutional thing. And so the idea that Republicans, I hope they get a lot out of it, because the idea that Republicans are now going to go along with basically legalizing what Barack Obama had done illegally is kind of mystifying.
Yeah, once you put it in the bill from Congress, you can't appropriate, and that's the whole constitutional question. Tom, here is the Senate Majority, Senate Minority Leader, and the Treasury Secretary on tax reform.
I think I can safely say that we're on the same page. His agenda is our agenda for the balance of the year, is to complete the job on taxes.
When the American people see it, they ain't going to like it at all.
If we get tax reform done this year, it will be extraordinary, and that's our objective. Our objective is to get it on the president's desk by December, to get him to sign it this year.
Now, they have to do the budget. It's not Wednesday, it's Thursday to vote on the budget. It seems like they may get there. Senator McCain is signing on, saying he is going to vote for the budget. We don't think Senator Paul will at this point. But this year seems to be a little hedging.
Yes, but I do think you see the momentum building in Congress. Republicans recognize they need a win. And on tax reform, something that, reducing the size of the state potentially, but also putting more money in people's pockets, especially on that corporate tax reform front, which I think a lot of Republicans see as very important in the globalized economy. There is this sort of unity between we need to get something done and, okay, on this issue is probably the one that we're most going to agree with the White House on.
Yeah, Shannon, is there this momentum? The Treasury Secretary seems to think so.
Well, there's certainly the desire and the acknowledgement that they need to do something on taxes, but tax reform is very difficult. That's why we haven't had it in more than 2 decades. Now, if we're talking about something like middle-class tax cuts, if we're just talking about a lot of candy and not any vegetables, so tax cuts and no pay-fors, no entitlement reforms, yeah, maybe that's something they could squeak through. But the idea was supposed to be broad tax reform, simplifying the tax structure, overhauling the way we think about taxes in this country. And that is a big, long debate. And here we are, October 17th. We've got a Thanksgiving holiday coming up, a Christmas holiday coming up. The calendar is ticking down to do this year.
Yeah, Charlie, are they going to have problems with the deficit hawks up on the Hill, or is everybody Art Laffer up there now?
No, I think that they're going to have real problems with it. But, at the end of the day, I think that there's a sliding scale with tax reform. You can do big stuff, or you can sort of nibble around the edges. And I think that they will get at least something so that they can claim a major victory, before the end of the year, or maybe into the beginning of next year.
Yeah, Tom, I just want to get your thoughts on this situation in Iraq. I know you've written on it about the Kurds, the Iraqis. Your thoughts? It seems pretty tense there.
Yes, it is very tense, and I think the issue that we face now is what are the Iranians, the Russians, and also the Turks actually now going to do about this? That potentially they could compress the entire region of Kurdistan and create some very negative situations there. So I think American influence is going to be very important. One final point: a big key player there on behalf of the Iraqi government is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, and so the president mentioned them last week. We have to see what happens.
All right, we fit a lot in that panel. Shannon, Charlie, and Tom, thank you very much. A lot in this show as well. When we come back, taking a stand for the national anthem. A little chilly out here on the North Lawn tonight. Finally tonight, as NFL owners and players meet to discuss player protests and the national anthem, some blue-collar workers are taking a stand. 3 roofers in Maine put down their tools Saturday and stood for the national anthem as it played before a nearby high school football game.
Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave?
And video of coal miners in West Virginia going viral. Joshua Stowers decided to sing the Star-Spangled Banner during a routine safety meeting last week. Stowers told Fox affiliate WVNS he wanted everybody to feel like a family. He says some of his coworkers are veterans, and he knew the song would make them feel better. There you go. We've got a busy news day tomorrow. Up on Capitol Hill, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, testifying before the Judiciary Committee, and we'll bring it to you. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. From the White House every Tuesday, The Story, hosted by Martha McCallum in New York, starts right now.